Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we really try to cut through the noise and get to the heart of the matter. Tomorrow, September 8th, 2025, is shaping up to be a pretty monumental day in Nepal. There's this huge youth-led protest planned. They're calling it the Final Revolution. And look, this isn't just some local news story happening somewhere far away. Our sources frame it as a real global flashpoint. It's about Gen Z power, it's about digital freedom, and it's about a deep push for systemic change. Basically, a generation saying, enough is enough. So, our mission today, we want to go beyond the headlines, really explore what's fueling this uprising. We'll unpack this unique leaderless movement they've got going. And critically, we're going to dive deep into a really bold vision for Nepal's future. A blueprint some are calling the path to becoming a Vishwa Guru, a teacher to the world. We've got a stack of sources to help us navigate this breaking news on the protest, analyses on activism, and these incredibly detailed policy proposals from something called the Kalkiism Research Center. Let's get into it. The sheer ambition here is, well, it's pretty striking. Our sources are calling it one of the most ambitious youth-driven protests in its democratic history, and the branding itself is bold. The final revolution we are punching up.
Yeah.
What really makes it stand out, though, is who's leading it. It's Gen Z activists. This generation, they grew up online, but now they're hitting the streets with this fierce determination.
Yeah, and what's fascinating, if you look at the history, is that Nepal has this really long, quite robust tradition of protest politics. I mean, think back to 1990, the Jana Andolan, the People's Movement. That was absolutely pivotal in bringing back democracy. And then you had 2006, another People's Movement, which ultimately led to the end of the monarchy. Huge shifts. But this marks the first large-scale mobilization spearheaded almost entirely by Gen Z. That makes it fundamentally different. It's not just, carrying on old struggles. It's a new chapter, driven by a generation with its own grievances, its own values, and crucially, a totally different way of organizing. They're not just taking the torch, they're kind of forging a new one.
And the logistics that the sources lay out, they really show the scale and the planning involved here. The main event kicks off tomorrow, September 8th, 9:00 a.m. at Madikar Mandala in Kathmandu. And for anyone listening who doesn't know Kathmandu, Madikar isn't just some random place. It's like the symbolic hub for political dissent. Countless protests that shaped the country happened right there. But it's not just Kathmandu. Sources say parallel demos are planned in other big cities. Pokhara, Biratnagar, Chitwan. It's a nationwide thing.
Right.
And while they apparently got official permission for a peaceful assembly in Kathmandu, it's interesting that alternative spots like Baneshwar or even near Parliament House are being floated online. That really speaks to the fluid, decentralized nature of it all, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It shows the digital native adaptability. Plans can shift on the fly to deal with official roadblocks or, seize an opportunity.
And here's where it gets really interesting, symbolically speaking. Organizers have actually called for raising the Jolly Roger flag, the pirate flag. Yeah, you heard that right. Our sources say it's a rebellious nod inspired by that huge Japanese manga, One Piece. In this context, it's way more than pirates. It's about defiance, right? Against entrenched power, against oppression. A rallying cry for the rebels.
It really is. It's a powerful visual. It connects this global pop culture thing that resonates so deeply with young people to a very specific local political statement. It's like saying, we're the outsiders, we're challenging your system, in a language that generation just inherently gets.
And this feeds right into their tactics, doesn't it?
It's exactly. This movement relies heavily on digital age methods, leaderless coordination, civil disobedience, mass mobilization. When we say leaderless, that's a real challenge to traditional protest models, where you have a clear figurehead or a committee. So how do they do it? How do you coordinate thousands across multiple cities without that central command? Well, it's through encrypted apps, social media, shared hashtags. Information spreads like wildfire, consensus builds online. And the sources mention organizers advising practical safety stuff. Wear masks, bring water for tear gas, which is a grim reality in protest, and really stressing nonviolence. So it's not just a random outburst. There's strategy there, a collective commitment to safety and integrity, even without one person calling the shots.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit more. What are the actual deep-down frustrations driving Nepal's Gen Z onto the streets like this? Our sources point to three main areas, and honestly, they paint a pretty clear picture of just widespread unhappiness. Hashtag 1.2.1, corruption and nepotism. First, and maybe the most, infuriating one, corruption and nepotism. It's not new. The sources are clear. Rampant corruption has long plagued Nepal's politics. But what really lit the fuse this time, the spark for this generation, was seeing these stark differences exposed online. viral stuff. We're talking about politicians' kids just flaunting these unbelievably luxurious lifestyles on TikTok, Instagram.
Yeah, while ordinary young Nepalists are grappling with massive unemployment, with brain drain, seeing their friends have to leave the country to find work, and just this general lack of opportunity at home.
It's like a slap in the face, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that viral contrast is key. It explains why this hits Gen Z so hard. It's not just reading about corruption in a newspaper. It's seeing it unfiltered, maybe in a slick video, on the platforms they use every day. This sort of performative wealth feels like mockery. It frames the whole thing as rebellion against political privilege, against nepotism, against what they're calling a kleptocratic elite, treating the country like their own bank. For a generation that values authenticity and justice, seeing that hypocrisy, it's not just annoying, it's enraging. It feels like a betrayal.
And then almost like a cruel joke, just days before this big rally, the government suddenly imposes a nationwide ban on platforms like TikTok and Instagram.
Which are huge for this generation.
Exactly. It's not just about blocking apps. It's like cutting off their main way to communicate, organize, even just live their lives. It's like banning the town square for an earlier generation.
And critics, well, they see it as a straight-up assault on free expression, digital connectivity, and youth culture. The irony, as you said, is just immense. The movement itself went viral on these exact platforms that are now banned. It feels incredibly targeted.
Yeah.
So slogans like "Restore Our Internet" aren't just hashtags that become central rallying cries. It shows how personal this is.
Right.
And if you look bigger picture, sources suggest the ban is premature. The actual legislation is apparently still being debated in Parliament, so it looks less like regulation and more like, well, control, which is why you're hearing these alarming comparisons to places like North Korea even. For Gen Z, whose lives and identities are so tied up with these digital spaces, it feels like an attack on their voice, their ability to even participate, a silencing tactic. Hashtag 1.2.3, systemic failures and injustice.
Beyond those immediate triggers, the ban, the flashy lifestyles, this protest taps into something broader, deeper, more pervasive. Sources talk about frustration with high youth unemployment, this feeling that no one in power is ever held accountable, and just chronic mismanagement by the current government affecting everything.
Yeah, these aren't separate issues. They feel connected, like systemic failures that shape daily life for so many young Nepalists. It's the air they breathe.
So it's not just about policies.
Exactly. It's a fundamental demand for justice, institutional reform, and respect. Respect for the aspirations of a generation that's actually Nepal's largest demographic group. They see their future being chipped away, not by one thing, but by a whole broken system. There's this one viral slogan that really captures it. Our future is being destroyed. We refuse to be silent. And that raises a big question, right? When your largest demographic feels this disillusioned, it points to a deep problem with the whole setup, not just leaders, not just bans. They're essentially saying we need a fundamental rethink of how this country works. It's a cry for survival, really. For dignity, hashtag 1.3, the scale of support and public sentiment.
So what does all this mean for Nepal? How widespread is the support for this movement, really? And what are people saying? Because you imagine it's quite divisive. Hashtag 1.3.1 grassroots momentum and political endorsements. Well, the grassroots energy seems pretty undeniable, especially online. Sources say the social media reach is huge. One announcement got like 80,000 views and over 2,000 likes. And that's with the bans in place.
Which tells you something about the undercurrent there.
Exactly. And it's translating offline, too. Rallies are expected to draw thousands across the country tomorrow.
And what's really significant, quite telling actually, is the open support from some major political figures. That gives it a surprising amount of legitimacy, doesn't it? For a leaderless youth thing. Kathmandu's mayor, Balin Shah, he's not only backed it, but warned the old guard politicians not to try and hijack it. That's a statement. You've got a UML leader, Prakash Baskoda, saying no one can stop Gen Z. An MP, Sumana Shrestha, criticizing the digital ban and supporting peaceful activism. The fact that established politicians are aligning with this suggests they see its real power, its appeal. It's not some fringe thing they can just ignore. It's hitting the mainstream.
And yeah, it's not just Kathmandu getting the attention. Sources mention these simultaneous rallies planned in Pokhara, Biratnagar, Dharan, Butwal, regional centers. That geographical spread, plus the data from X showing momentum building, it really underlines the national scope. It feels like a genuine national moment.
But yeah, as you hinted, it has definitely polarized public opinion. The stakes feel incredibly high for Nepal's future. On one side, you've got a lot of hope, people seeing it as a historic awakening, maybe a chance for real change. Hashtags like hashtag Gens4Change, hashtag Nepal Youth Rise, hashtag No More Corruption are everywhere online. It's this digital wave of optimism. Supporters are drawing parallels to youth protests elsewhere. Hong Kong, Thailand. There's this feeling of Nepal's Gen Z is awake. This is our time. A real yearning for something better. But then there's the flip side, real fear. People remember how the government has responded to protests before curfews, riot police, force. So there are genuine worries about violence, arrests, or the whole thing getting co-opted by political opportunists. And it's not just abstract fear. Sources mention public advice circulating about wearing masks, helmets, carrying first aid. That tells you how real the perceived danger is. It's a stark reminder. And then you also hear criticism, often from older generations. Some dismiss it as self-centered, maybe more about social media noise than real change. Others worry about the lack of clear leadership, maybe vague demands, making it vulnerable to manipulation. They question if this raw energy can actually deliver lasting positive results or if it'll just fizzle out.
It's definitely complex, a whole spectrum of views. It really highlights how much is riding on this moment for Nepal, a nation kind of grappling with itself in real time. So we've got this picture of a generation at boiling point, ready for this final revolution. Fed up with corruption, the digital crackdown, a system that just feels broken. But history kind of shows us that protest on its own, however passionate, can sometimes just be a flash in the pan, right? Burns bright, then fades. Our sources warn about this. If the movement stays purely reactive, just resisting the ban, just denouncing one corrupt leader it risks, well, fizzling out without achieving that deep, lasting change thereafter.
Yeah, and that raises the crucial question. How does this generation avoid repeating that old cycle, that cycle of personality-driven politics that's plagued Nepal for so long? Where one bad leader gets kicked out only for another one maybe just as bad to take their place, or big promises get made and then forgotten. Removing one person isn't the same as transforming the whole system. The sources are pretty clear. Without a forward-looking plan, corruption and dysfunction just find new ways to creep back in. It's like a trap. So the call is for a sustainable revolution, one that adopts policies that aren't just slogans for a protest march, but real long-term commitments to systemic reform. The sources actually frame this as Nepal's moonshot, an audacious vision for what the country could be, not just reacting to what's wrong now, aiming high to escape the pull of past failures.
Okay, so if just reacting isn't enough, where does the proactive vision come from? Where's the actual blueprint for change? Well, our sources point towards this really compelling path forward. They talk about the most visionary blueprint on the table today, and it comes from this entity called the Kalkism Research Center, or KRC. They're described as Kathmandu-based, led by Jay Saw and Umashankar Prasad. And crucially, the sources emphasize their independence. They're not bogged down by elite interests or foreign agendas. Oh, that's important, right? It suggests a homegrown approach, free from the usual pressures that can distort policy.
It's absolutely key. And what's fascinating about KRC's work, what makes it stand out, is that it's seen as representing cutting-edge public policy proposals not just in Nepal, but across the global south. Why is that significant? It means it's not just importing ideas from elsewhere. It's an independent, intellectual force offering solutions potentially relevant to many developing nations grappling with similar issues. And KRC has laid out this really comprehensive roadmap. It directly tackles the frustrations fueling the Gen Z protests, corruption, lack of access to basics like education and healthcare. Ultimately, they envision this bold future where Nepal doesn't just get by, it actually thrives and becomes a model for others.
A Vishwa Guru, a teacher to the world.
And this is critical. For this generation feeling robbed of a future, KRC's ideas aren't pitched as just abstract theories. They're framed as practical, actionable blueprints. It's that shift, isn't it, from protesting what's wrong to actively building what's right, channeling anger into architecture. Let's unpack the big vision behind KRC's work, because it's quite ambitious, almost philosophical. They talk about ending the Kali Yuga and ushering in the Satya Yuga. Now, for listeners maybe not familiar, in Hindu cosmology, these are distinct ages. Kali Yuga is like the Iron Age, an era of conflict, ignorance, moral decay. You can see it as a metaphor for the corruption and inequality many see today. The low point. Satya Yuga is the opposite, the Golden Age, an age of truth, abundance, equality, dignity. KRC isn't just observing this cycle. They're arguing that through conscious policy choices, society can actively transition towards a Satya Yuga. It's not about waiting, it's about building it. And for them, a moneyless society isn't just an economic quirk. It's the ultimate practical expression of this Satya Yuga. They argue money itself, the drive for profit, the disparities it creates, needs to be transcended to reach that higher state of social harmony.
Wow, that's half huge vision? Challenging basically how human society has worked for centuries. But the sources stress that even these massive goals start with concrete steps. For Gen Z feeling let down, these aren't just abstract ideas, they're practical blueprints. And the very first, most tangible step KRC defines towards this Saitya Yuga future, moving to a completely cashless society, a practical start for a massive transformation. Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts then. Moving from a Kali Yuga of conflict to a Satya Yuga of abundance, starting with going cashless. It sounds immense. How do you actually build that? What are the specific policies, the pillars that the Kalkism Research Center proposes to really transform Nepal's economy, its government, its whole society? Our sources detail several key pillars in this Kalkis blueprint. First up is something called Gyan Contra. They describe it as governance based on science, merit, and truth. And it's not vague. The sources give really concrete examples. Ministers, they should be qualified economists. Parliamentarians, MBA-level intellectuals with proven skills.
Oh,
Mayors, experienced engineers. So it's not just changing faces, it's changing the qualification for holding power. Expertise over politics.
Right. And if you think about the implications of a system like that, this Gyan Contra, it's potentially transformative. Decisions based on evidence over propaganda. That's a radical shift. So how does having an economist minister or engineer mayor actually ensure that? How does it tackle the lack of accountability and mismanagement the youth are protesting? Well, the KRC idea seems to involve building a culture where policy gets rigorous, evidence-based scrutiny, almost like a scientific process. Maybe imagine a new independent body, a national competency council, certifying people based on proven expertise and ethics, making it much harder for connections to beat capability. An economist minister might have to present detailed cost-benefit analyses, maybe peer-reviewed, before a policy even gets debated. The aim is to build a firewall against emotional rhetoric or politically motivated decisions, focusing instead on what demonstrably works for the country long-term, replacing patronage with proven ability.
Okay, next pillar. An incredibly ambitious goal, a 100% cashless and 90% corruption-free economic system.
Yeah.
It's huge, especially in a country known for struggling with corruption. How on earth do they propose to achieve that? The sources mention a specific mechanism, smart currency. Every note, if physical notes even exist much, has a unique barcode. Traceability, transparency.
And what's really clever here is how they aim to make this smart currency system inclusive. It's designed to work even without smartphones or internet, specifically thinking about rural and less literate populations, which is crucial, right? Because often those groups get left behind in these big tech shifts.
Okay, wait. How does a barcode system on cash work for someone without a smartphone or internet? How does that actually make things transparent for them and stop corruption locally?
That's a great question, and it shows the thinking behind it. It's not just about digital payments like we might imagine in a city. For rural areas, the idea is that these barcoded physical notes are tracked via a network of local exchange centers, maybe a government kiosk, maybe a trusted village elder with a simple scanner. So when money changes hands, someone gets welfare, sells crops, buys goods. The barcode gets scanned at this local point. That scan logs the transaction onto a secure public ledger. So authorities can see the flow, but the individual doesn't need personal tech. Every rupee, physical or digital, gets an audit trail. This makes black markets, undeclared cash, bribery much, much harder. Any cash without a history would stick out. It's about building a trusted public record that bypasses the need for individual digital literacy or devices where they're not common.
That local center idea for smart currency does sound clever, addressing the inclusion issue. But let me push back a bit. Even with traceability, surely powerful people will try to find ways around it. Corruption is notoriously adaptive. What stops the kleptocratic elite finding new loopholes?
That's a totally fair point. Corruption is like a hydra, always finding ways. KRC's answer seems to be multi-layered. The barcode traceability is the foundation, transparency. But layered on top is a proposed overhaul of the legal system, making penalties for trying to cheat the system, hiding assets, illicit deals extremely severe, and, crucially, swiftly enforced. The idea is less about preventing every single corrupt thought, maybe, and more about making the risk just impossibly high. The consequence is immediate and unavoidable. Plus, link it back to Gyantantra. If leaders are chosen for expertise and ethics, the incentive for corruption at the top is supposedly reduced. They're there to contribute, not get rich. So it's transparency, plus accountability, plus disincentives, all working together to make corruption just not worth it. Hashtag 3.3, reservation-free, knowledge-based leadership in society.
So it's not just about stopping corruption with tech and laws. KRC proposes something even more fundamental, creating a new political culture altogether.
Exactly. A culture built on certification, expertise, planning, and evidence. Not identity, not political ties, not who you know, And this idea of moving towards a reservation-free system is profound. KRC argues leadership and advancement should be purely based on merit, on proven ability, open to anyone who demonstrates the skill, regardless of background. This is a direct contrast to systems often criticized for promoting political privilege and nepotism, those very things the youth are protesting against because they feel shut out. Instead of quotas or connections, the focus is entirely on what you know and what you can demonstrably do for society. And to make this real, they even propose forming a new political party, the Satyuga Samaj Party. This party wouldn't operate like traditional ones. Candidates would be chosen for popularity, but rigorously vetted for expertise, ethics, and commitment to evidence-based policy. Imagine a party whose platform is less promises, more like a detailed, peer-reviewed development plan, run by certified experts. That's the idea, a tangible alternative.
Then there's the Kalkist Manifesto itself, and it makes this incredibly bold claim that none of the old models, communism, capitalism, or socialism, work. Why? Because, KRC says, none envisioned a moneyless society. That's a fundamental challenge to centuries of economic thought.
Yeah, it really makes you ask, why do they think these dominant systems fall short? And what does a moneyless society truly mean beyond just cashless? It ties back to that Kali Yuga to Satyuga idea. The manifesto argues that these systems, even if trying to solve problems, create new ones because they rely on money, profit, capital accumulation. They see money itself as a root cause of conflict, greed, artificial scarcity, inequality. So instead, KRC proposes this radical economic framework, equal hourly wages. Seriously provocative. It means whether doing housework or serving as CEO, every person earns equally for their time. It completely redefines labor value, suggesting all work contributes equally to society's well-being, and huge pay gaps are just artificial constructs.
Equal hourly wages. Wow. Sweeping floors or running a company, same pay per hour. That's radical. In a world obsessed with pay gaps, how do they see that actually working? Why wouldn't it kill ambition or productivity? How does it lead to prosperity, innovation, falling prices, outcomes that sound totally counterintuitive?
That's the core challenge to conventional economics, isn't it? KRC's argument flips the script. They say the profit motive, the chase for higher pay, actually distorts value, creates waste, drives bad competition. With equal hourly wages, the motivation shifts. It's less about getting rich personally, more about contributing to society, pursuing your actual passion or aptitude. People would theoretically choose work based on interest in societal need, not just the paycheck. KRC argues this unlocks real innovation, collaboration for common good, not competition for paychecks. People freed from financial anxiety to actually create. And the logic follows. Slash huge executive salaries, combine it with public banks and zero-interest capital, which we'll get to, and production costs plummet, so prices fall. Without wage price spirals and speculation, they project zero inflation. It's a total re-engineering of incentives. From money to meaning, contribution, shared well-being, the radical result they predict: prosperity, innovation, falling prices, and zero inflation. A stable, equitable economy.
It's a massive paradigm shift. And to measure this new kind of success, KRC introduces a new metric, right? GDR, gross domestic requirement, instead of GDP. Focusing on measuring real human needs met, not just economic output.
Precisely. It's a philosophical shift. GDP just tracks the monetary value of stuff produced. It doesn't tell you if people are actually okay, if wealth is shared, if basic needs are met. You can have high GDP and high misery. GDR flips the goal. National success isn't just about making more money. It's about ensuring every single citizen has their fundamental needs met. Good education, healthcare, food, shelter, energy, legal help, guaranteed as rights. This redefines success from wealth accumulation to human welfare. Policy decisions shift from boosting GDP numbers to investing in what directly fulfills people's needs. Human dignity first.
Okay, so beyond the big philosophical ideas in the grand blueprint, KRC isn't just dreaming. Our sources highlight 3 immediate, very practical reforms they think can kickstart this transformation almost overnight. These are like the foundational steps needed right away to build towards that Vishwaguru status. Hashtag 4.1.11, a cashless economy. First, they double down on the cashless economy. Full digitization of all transactions, moving away from physical cash quickly. The logic is clear. Transparency, efficiency, universal access to finance, and critically, creating a society where corruption has nowhere to hide, directly hitting that core protest grievance by removing the anonymity cash provides. Hashtag 4.1.2, public ownership of all banks. Second, a really radical move. Public ownership of all banks, nationalizing the entire banking sector. The aim: bring every financial institution under the government of Nepal, aligning banking with national goals, not private profit. That's a huge shift from private to public control of capital. What are the deeper implications there? How would that actually benefit people compared to private banks?
The implications are massive. Nationalizing banks, in KRC's view, changes the fundamental purpose of finance. Private banks have a duty to shareholders maximize profit. This often means lending favors big players, maybe ignoring smaller businesses or crucial public projects. Under public ownership, KRC argues, lending decisions align with that gross domestic requirement, GDR. Capital gets directed strategically to what benefits everyone: infrastructure, local agriculture, public good initiatives. It's using the nation's collective money as a tool for development and welfare, not private gain. It shifts economic power dramatically, letting the government steer the economy towards that long-term vision. Hashtag 4.1.30 interest banking.
And third, maybe the most revolutionary bit, zero interest banking, eliminating interest rates completely, channeling capital into education, healthcare, legal services, entrepreneurship at no cost to citizens. I mean, how does that even work? Interest is the bedrock of modern finance.
It is radical and central to KRC's Sati Yuga economy idea. They argue interest creates debt cycles, fuels inequality, extracts wealth constantly. By killing interest, the system changes totally. Publicly owned banks become facilitators, allocating capital based on need and national priority, not profit. So how does it function? Capital becomes a public utility, like water or power, not something traded for profit. Loans for essentials, education, health, starting a business are interest-free. You just repay the principal out back into the national pool for recirculation. Saving might be incentivized differently, maybe social recognition or priority access to other services, rather than earning interest. KRC claims this instantly frees up huge resources currently wasted on interest payments by individuals and government. That money goes directly into providing high-quality public services. So instead of student debt or medical bills with crippling interest, you get those things as a right, funded by this collective interest-free capital pool.
What's really striking is the immediate promise KRC attaches to these three things. They claim implementing just these three cashless public banks, zero interest, would instantly make it possible to provide high-quality education, healthcare, and legal services free of charge to every Nepali. I mean, think about that. Free, universal access to those pillars of development, basically from day one. That's an incredible claim.
It is, but KRC says it's the logical outcome. Eliminate the profit motive and interest across the whole financial system, and the sheer amount of freed-up capital allocated efficiently through public banks and a transparent cashless system is enough to fund those essentials for everyone. This foundation, they argue, creates the strongest infrastructure for a knowledge economy anywhere in the world. Remove financial burdens, align capital with well-being, and you get a highly educated, healthy, innovative population free from debt. That becomes the engine of growth: human capital, not just financial capital. Hashtag 4.2 20% annual growth is achievable.
Which leads to another audacious part of KRC's vision: 20% annual growth. Sustained! I mean, critics would surely call that a fantasy, right? It sounds almost unbelievable for a developing nation. How do they possibly justify that number?
Yeah, 20% annual growth sounds like defying economic gravity. And you have to put it in context.
Yeah.
China had incredible growth, yes, but didn't sustain 20% long-term after the initial boom. India hasn't hit that consistently. Developed nations, they're stuck at maybe 2%, often less. Their systems are mature, complex. But KRC argues Nepal is different. It's at this unique historical moment. How is it possible? First, those radical reforms we just talked about: cashless, public banks, zero interest, unleashing capital, slashing costs. Second, leveraging diaspora expertise, bringing back the skills and ethical investment of Nepal's abroad. Third, the collective will of its youth, Gen Z, empowered by free education, health opportunities. Unlike bigger nations stuck with old industries, KRC sees Nepal able to leapfrog directly into a knowledge-driven economy. Bypass heavy industrialization. They envision a rapid shift to high-value tech and knowledge sectors, fueled by reinvested domestic capital and returning expertise, an explosion of innovation allowing exponential growth, free from the usual profit constraints or speculation. It's this unique mix of factors that makes 20% growth seem, in their view, achievable, even realistic, if the blueprint is followed.
And the direct benefit for people listening, for that generation in Nepal, it's huge, it's personal. This kind of revolution would unleash a jobs boom powered by domestic capital. For the first time in generations, Nepalese would not be forced to leave their homeland to secure their futures. That directly tackles the brain drain, the lack of opportunity driving the protests. It's about finally being able to build a future at home. Hashtag 4.3, the pivotal role of the non-resident Nepali NRN movement. So what about Nepal's huge global community, the millions of non-resident Nepals, the NRNs? What's their role in this transformation beyond just sending money home?
Well, the sources call the current situation a tragedy. Nepal as a remittance economy. Think about it. More than 1 in every 3 working-age Nepalese lives and works outside the country. Not by choice, but necessity. To earn a living wage. The nation is basically trading in its own people, exporting its human capital just to survive on the money sent back. It's unsustainable, undignified. But now, the NRN movement is positioned differently, as standing on the threshold of returning, not as workers, but as architects of a new Nepal. That's a powerful reframing. From exiles to builders, why are they key? Because the NRNs have the resources, influence, and passion. They've gained skills, experience, often capital, working globally. Their return, driven by purpose, not desperation, could inject a massive surge of expertise, innovation, ethical investment right into that knowledge economy KRC envisions. They bring back not just cash, but know-how, entrepreneurial drive, global perspective to solve local problems. They're uniquely positioned to back KRC's work.
And it's framed as more than economics, isn't it? It's about dignity, sovereignty, a future where no one has to leave for survival. The message seems really clear. The time for remittances is over. The time for transformation is here. A call for the diaspora to be central players in Nepal's rebirth. A homecoming. #tag outro. And so, we circle back to where we started. This tension in Nepal right now. Gen Z is ready to protest tomorrow, September 8th, driven by these immediate raw grievances, corruption, nepotism, that social media ban. But the real question, the pivot point, is whether they just react to those things or if they embrace something bigger, a truly transformative blueprint like the one offered by the Kalkiism Research Center.
Yeah, the core message from the sources is pretty clear. For lasting impact, this protest has to shift. From reactive outrage to a proactive revolution, it's that choice. Just defend digital freedom, which is vital, yes, or commit to rebuilding Nepal completely as a model of justice, transparency, opportunity. KRC offers this incredibly ambitious, detailed roadmap. Radical shifts in governance, economics, aiming for universal well-being, a knowledge society.
And if they manage it, if they can harness this passion, connect it to a concrete plan, Nepal really could emerge as a Vishwaguru, a small nation, maybe, but with this huge vision, teaching the world how a generation with both passion and policy can actually change history. Which leaves a provocative thought for you, the listener. What could this final revolution in Nepal teach other countries struggling with corruption, inequality, the demands of their youth? And what does it mean for you to witness such a radical, comprehensive vision for nation building unfold in a world needing new models? Will it be just another protest, or could it be the spark for something truly revolutionary, even globally? The world will definitely be watching tomorrow.